Hello and welcome to WorldCanvass from International Programs at the University of Iowa. I'm Joan Kjaer. WorldCanvass is coming to you from the Senate chamber of the Old Capitol building, the Old Capitol Museum here on the campus of the University of Iowa, and we're happy to have you with us. This program is part 2 of a 4-part series on the rise of public opinion in China. We're investigating the influence of public opinion on political reform, political trust, foreign policy, and public discourse, especially through social media. The focus of tonight's discussion is public opinion and political trust. Joining me on stage are 3 experts in the field of Chinese public opinion research. Wenfeng Tang, professor of political science and director of undergraduate studies here at the University of Iowa, is just to my left. Hi, Wenfeng. Thank you for joining us.
Glad to be here.
Thank you. Bruce Dixon is next, and he's professor of political science and international affairs at George Washington University. Thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
Thank you. And here at the far end is Melanie Mannion, who is a professor of political science at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Thank you for being here.
Happy to be here.
Thanks so much.
Tradition.
Ambition.
Exploration. Inspiration.
You feel it when you step on campus at the University of Iowa.
The energy and pride of students inspired by our history.
And excited about our future. When you join the Hawkeye family, you're a part of it all.
Be a part of it.
Be a part of it.
Be a part of it. Be a Hawkeye.
So much. So first, Wenfeng, I'm going to throw the question to you. I think when we talk about political trust, we're talking about trust in the system. At least that's the way I imagine it. So should we assume that with greater political openness in China and greater participation by the masses, there's been an increase in political trust?
Yes. That's one thing. If you look at public opinion survey data, that it shows consistently that the trust, particularly of the central government in China, is very high, about 75%.
Wow.
But one interesting thing about this is there's a lot lower trust of the local government. So in China, you see this gap between trust in central government and trust in local governments.
Isn't that funny? In our present state here in the United States, it's pretty much the reverse,
Right,
isn't it?
I would expect the opposite, yes.
Yeah, huh. And so how is public opinion surveyed in China? Maybe I'll ask you, Bruce, to fill us in on that.
Well, there's a number of different ways that public opinion is surveyed in the country, primarily through different academic institutions. Most major universities in China have survey research centers, and they routinely survey public opinion on a wide variety of issues, sometimes just taking the temperature, the mood of the country, sometimes looking at very specific kinds of questions. Those are ones that get published and we know about. There's commercial operations like Horizon that also do a lot of public opinion surveys. The government also routinely surveys public opinion, but those are usually internal surveys, and the results of those are usually not publicized.
Mm-hmm. Well, as academics, you're all very much involved in this area, and whether academic surveys or reviewing government public opinion polling, you have to sort of make sense of all of it or figure out what it all means. Give me a sense of what a day in your work is like, Melanie, when you're trying to figure out what's happening now in China.
Well, we obviously not only use the data that we ourselves have gathered and the data that our Chinese colleagues have gathered, so we do rely very much on these sorts of quantitative data and try to make sense of it. But in trying to make sense of it, it's very important for us to keep track of the changing context in China, because things are changing very rapidly. We have to keep track of current affairs, and I think all of us do that. We keep track of current affairs. And for those of us studying Chinese politics, we have a remarkable institution available to us. We have our own chat group of specialists in Chinese politics, and we exchange views on that and develop a cumulative knowledge on current events in that way.
So, please.
If I may come back to the trust issue. The first question people always ask is, how do you know they're telling you the truth? That's the question we, as scholars of public opinion, often have to address. So we've been researching on the reliability of political trust in China. We look at different reasons why trust is so high in China. One obvious answer would be economic reform, right? Economic growth, improvement of living standard. When people are living a better life, of course, they show more trust and support of the government. That might be true, but there's another reason people frequently mention, that is the cultural value. China has been a traditionally hierarchically structured society, so people would expect to show greater respect for authority, so maybe that's another reason for trust. But in my research, I find that something more interesting is actually a big reason for trust is government responsiveness. And people feel when government responds to public demand, then you see a very direct impact of rising political support.
Yeah. Can you give an example of an occasion, of an instance of a building public outcry that really has caused quick and a fairly immediate response from the government?
Sure. If you read the media, Western media, you see high-profile protests in China. Many of them, just in the last couple of years, you see protests in now I'm Shifang. I think there's just so many different cases, high-profile cases, protesting against local environmental projects, protesting against local government land seizure. Then some economic project, local economic project. So the typical process of this protest is people would go on street, protest against the local government, and then the central government would send someone here, investigate the case, and then they would fire the local officials and compensate local residents. So that process, actually, maybe people wouldn't think too highly of the local governments, but as a result, they think more highly of the central government.
Yeah.
And that's become a common means of political participation. So popular protest now about particular issues is a form of political participation in China. And it's something people now take for granted, aren't so much afraid to express their views, to go out on the streets and demand things when it has to do with specific policy issues.
Right.
Second down and 2, Bodell. Green in motion. Green has the first down. Makes a run at 20. Spins. Stay on his feet.
5-yard line, goal line. Touchdown, Iowa. You will never see a prettier run than that.
Show your Iowa pride, the Iowa Hawk Shop, where Iowa shops. The ultimate collection of Iowa Hawkeye merchandise, gifts, and apparel. Help support the University of Iowa. All proceeds benefit men's and women's athletic teams and student programs. The Iowa Hawk Shop, where Iowa shops. Show your Iowa pride. Call 1-800-HAWK-SHOP or visit www.hawkshop.com.
But would there be certain issues that might cause someone to really think, oh, I'm going to get into big trouble if I show my face at this protest? There would be some...
Well, it's often the case that after you have these large-scale protests, even when the government intervenes and sort of meets the demands of protesters, there's often some retaliation against the leaders of the protest, or people are identified, chosen as leaders in order to be punished. There's really ambivalence that the government has. On the one hand, they find it useful to get this information that comes from protests, but they don't want it to be a precedent for other people in other communities with similar grievances to do the same thing. So it's almost a bit of a tug of war. On the one hand, they want to address the legitimate concerns that get raised, but they don't want similar demands being raised elsewhere. There's been rising protests around the country that often do get attention, and at least the material demands get made. Back wages get paid. If land has been confiscated without compensation, they'll pay some compensation. But when there's if it's just straight material demands, you're usually in safe ground. If you're raising more political demands, not just we want higher wages, but we want our own union to negotiate for us. Right. Now you've crossed over into political demand, and that's usually unacceptable.
Right. And something like a protest for more freedom of expression or something like that would perhaps not go down so well. Yeah. I'm sorry, what were you saying?
I was thinking, well, I can come back to that. I forgot what I was going to add to their point. But one thing I would like to say is now I remember. You see China, there's two trends going on. You see very high political trust, right? Then you see the rising number of protests.
Yeah.
And these things, two things are going on at the same time. So if you see more protests, then you will naturally expect low trust of the government. But why these two things are going on at the same time, I think that's a very interesting phenomenon.
Yeah.
I think one reason, part of my reason, is this central-local government difference. You know, the central government uses local government to boost its own image. So that's why you see a lot of protests, and people are encouraged to protest against the local government. As a result, the central government trust improves.
Yeah. So you have all spent a lot of time studying China. You, of course, grew up in China and came here for your professional career. But in these last 30 years, you mentioned that you had been in China in 1989. What is the difference you feel, both as a scholar and just an individual in China? Is there a tangible difference in the way people talk about their lives?
Yes, and actually, Tang Wenfeng and I were schoolmates in Peking University in 78 to 80, so we go back a long way. And so not just 89, but over these 35 years, huge differences. I just would never have imagined the China I see today. In terms of, let me just think about particular events, and you were asking about responsiveness and public participation. So June '89 was certainly an example, very different from the kinds of protests we've been talking about just now, where there were days when there were 1 million people on the square, and certainly. No doubt in my mind that the government action in June '89 was not consistent with what people were asking for in the streets. And yet, at the same time, after '89, we saw big changes. We did see government responsiveness. In other words, they were very clear that they didn't want that again. So they did several things. One, of course, they boosted the military budget. But they also took actions, preemptive actions. So, for example, the largest anti-corruption campaign in China took place after June 8. It took place in August, September '89. So they had an understanding, and Deng Xiaoping himself said, if we don't take action, if we don't shoot a few people, if we don't execute a few of these officials, the people won't be satisfied. So there was a clear recognition that the sorts of issues the people were concerned about and protesting about on the street were a danger for the regime. And one of the things we have seen this regime do is take preemptive measures to try to deal with these sorts of issues. And then, of course, the big story of China is an economic story. Yeah. And that, again, is something I could never have imagined, and I'm sure Tang Wenfeng, my classmate, would never have imagined either in 78 or 80.
There are over 24,000 bridges in Iowa. But only one connects University of Iowa hospitals and clinics to Iowa River Landing. From pediatrics and women's health to cardiology and routine exams, world-class medical care can be found at a new convenient location in Coralville. Iowa River Landing is here, and it's designed just for you. For an appointment, call 319-467-2000.
Show your Iowa pride, the Iowa Hawk Shop, where Iowa shops. The ultimate collection of Iowa Hawkeye merchandise, gifts, and apparel. Help support the University of Iowa. All proceeds benefit men's and women's athletic teams and student programs. The Iowa Hawk Shop, where Iowa shops. Show your Iowa pride. Call 1-800-HAWK-SHOP or visit www.hawkshop.com.
I do remember in the late 70s and early 80s, classmates with Melanie and some other Western foreign exchange students on campus at Peking University. We were looking after them. Oh, those people are so rich. But now today in Iowa City, I was talking to an Iowa City BMW dealer. He told me he had 3 Chinese student customers already. It seems like there's a lot of change over the 30 years.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing for me I'd like to ask you to explain that to me a little bit, how this increasing sense of well-being, maybe the place in the world of China as a nation, on the one hand, obviously that's good for Chinese people, for Chinese business and so on. Why does that encourage the government to give people a little more freedom to say what they want to say or protest? I mean, why do those things go together?
Well, this goes back to Professor Engelhardt's, who is a keynote speaker in our today's conference. And he mentioned modernization. Modernization would increase, change people's value, and it would make people try to be more aware of their political rights. One's survival is no longer a concern, so people naturally demand more say. And I think authoritarian regimes find it more difficult to rule without giving people more say, because everything is so technologically connected with each other. They have to rely on experts to rule rather than just sitting there making their own decisions.
Well, and then of course with all of the Asian students coming to not only US universities, but having educations all around the world, and then many returning to China, that I imagine that exposure to many different cultures and different ways to do things, as is true when our students go to other countries, they come back with new ways to look at the world. I suspect the same thing happens with Chinese students who are studying under you at George Washington University.
I think it's been a real mixed bag in terms of experience and lessons they have and whether they've taken it back to China or not. There used to be an assumption within the US government that if you wanted to promote change within China, you would encourage more Chinese to come to US for education, you get infected with the democratic bug and then go back to China. What often happens is that many people choose to stay and not go back. The people who do go back were often disenchanted with their experience, that they were never fully integrated, faced some degree of bias perhaps. So when they go back, it's not with warm and fuzzy feelings about the United States. What we're now seeing is a much wider range of students coming from China. It used to be just truly the best and brightest that were coming, and they had government support and some type of vetting process. Now there's so many people who can afford to send their own kids abroad for education, for high school as well as undergrad and graduate education, that we're now getting to see a much wider range of people that are coming here. Still, many of them choose to stay in the United States, at least for a short period of time, to work before going back to China. In some cases, choose not to go back at all.
Show your Iowa pride, the Iowa Hawk Shop, where Iowa shops. The ultimate collection of Iowa Hawkeye merchandise, gifts, and apparel. Help support the University of Iowa. All proceeds benefit men's and women's athletic teams and student programs. The Iowa Hawk Shop, where Iowa shops. Show your Iowa pride. Call 1-800-HAWK-SHOP or visit www.hawkshop.com.
You're going to have a 3D card.
Why are you taking it, Tasia?
So the key thing here is that
And so earlier you mentioned this traditional society, the feeling that there was respect for authority and so on, that is a long-standing tradition in Chinese culture. Do you think that with a younger generation, this group coming through now, do you see that as being diminished in any way, or would you expect it to hold true as it has?
In a way, yes, of course. I mean, these people are more modernized or more westernized, and they naturally would be more independent and less traditional. But I think there's something else is also going on in Chinese society. You know, you have all these changes with economic growth and modernization, but China still is in some way very different from Western society. So even with this modernization, I think there will still be some Chinese characteristics, including Chinese tradition.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I understand at this most recent meeting at which Xi Jinping spoke about perhaps, what was it? Something about no longer, something about changes in no longer thinking that we're in the American sphere or something. You would remember the phrase better than I, but President Obama, of course, couldn't go because of problems here at home, and it was a natural opportunity for the leader of China to say, you know, maybe Asia doesn't need America quite as much as America thinks it does. Do you have any sense of this in the research you're doing? Is this something that Chinese people are thinking, that America is sort of not what they're dreaming of?
There's sort of like two different levels. On the one hand, there is sort of resentment toward American policy and what the American government does, and a general notion that the U.S. is sort of resisting China's rise. At the same time, a strong interest in American culture and at a more societal level. The U.S. in some ways is both the most respected and the most disliked country, but at different levels. One's more societal, one's more political and governmental. So a real sort of mix of feelings among public opinion in China toward the U.S.
Mm-hmm.